Oh, hi people. Welcome to my shop. But don't get too comfortable because we're actually not going to be in here for this video. This video, we're headed back over the mountain to the Central Oregon house where we're going to do a little work on the outside. We're going to add a new walkway up to the front door. Now, I don't know if you remember, but the old walkway, well, it was a little rough. Looks something like this. And after looking at the deck and how much we're going to have to tear the deck up in order to do everything, we decided that the best thing to do is actually just to rip out the entire deck. So we haven't gotten quite that far yet, but the entire deck will come out. And I think we're going to do either a poured slab or pavers, which in my opinion is going to be better because the maintenance is a lot less on it. It's not going to rot over time. So it's out with the old and in with the new. The old deck's already been completely ripped out, but we have to regrade all the ground. We got to bring in gravel and dirt and boulders and all that stuff. So without any further ado, let's head over there and get some work done. After I sweep the floor. Craig!
So here we are, the front of the cabin. Now as you can see, the concreters, the concrete guys, the concrete people, they came in and they graded it out fairly close to pour that concrete slab in front of the front door. But we still got a little work to do. Now let me introduce you to my good friend Evan Newcomb. He owns Pride Hardscape and he, unlike me, actually knows what he's doing when it comes to this sort of thing. So I'm going to be leaning on his expertise a lot throughout this video. Now the first thing we had to do was unload the excavator, and then he pulled out this weird level that has a sippy straw attached to it. Not sure how it works, but he needed to figure out all of our elevations so we could determine how much we had to dig out. Now, fortunate for us, the grading up to the pad was pretty good. But we wanted to cut into the hillside a little bit and make our paver area / walkway area just a little bit bigger. So Evan hopped on his mini excavator and started scooping up handfuls of dirt. This excavator is going to come in super handy for this project because not only can it dig, it can also lift and place boulders. Ooh, I got a feeling that Evan was really good at that stuffed animal claw machine as a kid. As Evan was digging, we ran into this cable that did not show up when we called for locations. Thankfully, it was just an old phone line and we didn't need it anyways. We also dug into this piece of PVC pipe, but that was also old, so we just cut it off with a multi-tool and kept on digging. Pretty soon, Evan was able to, for the most part, widen the path exactly where we wanted to, right along the pond, and while he did that, I practiced my balancing skills, because I have a feeling they're going to come in handy later. The cool thing about Central Oregon is that the boulders over here are all volcanic, which means you can feel really manly by lifting them into the air, even though they're pumice and they weigh about 10 pounds. I shouldn't have told you that. I should have just let you be thoroughly impressed. Anyways, Evan scooped up dirt into wheelbarrows. I moved the wheelbarrows over to the corner where we're going to smooth it out later, and pretty soon we had the entire thing dug out, and it looked something like this. Next, it was time to add a little bit of gravel. Now, Evan's also got this really cool trailer with a conveyor belt, so we can just deposit the gravel right into the wheelbarrows and place it where we need it. So wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, we went down the steep driveway and we dumped out a little gravel. Now we're going to bring in a lot more gravel throughout the video to bring it up to the correct level and to compact it. But for now, we just needed a little bit of gravel in the place that we dug out so there'd be a gravelly surface to place our boulders. Speaking of boulders, that's where we headed off to next. Now I assumed there'd be like a boulder store that you'd go to and say, 10 boulders, please. But we actually had to drive down into the bottom of a quarry where they were actively breaking the boulders off from a cliff face, and then a nice man in a much larger excavator very carefully placed the boulders one by one into the back of our trailers. Check out my new truck. Just bought that bad boy. F-350, baby. While we were out at the quarry getting boulders, Western Interlock delivered our pavers to the house. So that was a nice surprise when we got home. Now, I was kind of wondering how we were going to get the boulders out of the trailer and into the correct place, but Evan was on top of it. We started by laying out some plywood on the driveway so he didn't damage the concrete. He unloaded all the boulders from the trailer onto the plywood and then very carefully moved them from the plywood into their positions. Now, I quickly realized that Evan should not be messed with during this process. He entered some weird Zen-like state while he slowly and meticulously placed each boulder. It's like he was playing his own internal form of Jenga. He'd take a boulder, place it, slightly move it, pick it back up, reposition it, place it again. I didn't talk to him for like 3 hours. When he was hungry, he ate. When he was thirsty, he drank. When he was tired, he slept. But mostly he just sat in that bobcat and placed boulders. When he needed more, he got him out of the trailer. When he needed a little bit knocked off, he called on me to hit it with a hammer, which made me actually feel like I was doing something. And pretty soon he had the entire first layer of the boulder wall in place. And then it was time to add more gravel. This would probably be a good time to tell you about the type of pavers that we're installing. Now, these pavers are called permeable pavers, which means that we don't have to grade the actual slope of the pavers themselves for drainage because the pavers are permeable, which means they'll allow water to move through the pavers and everything is essentially a drain field. Which also means that we have to use a special type of aggregate. This is 3/4 to 1/4 clean stone, which means it has no minus, or fine aggregate that would compact and keep water from draining out. With our first layer of boulders in place, we added a bunch of that aggregate behind them to kind of secure them and keep them from moving around. And then while we had the wheelbarrows out, Craig and I, Craig showed up, started adding gravel everywhere. While we did that, Evan was back on the bobcat adding our second layer of pavers on top of that gravel that we just put behind the first layer. This kind of made a soft cushion for everything to sit. At some point, we ran out of gravel, so Evan sent me with my truck and trailer to get more while him and Craig stayed behind and started working on the step. That's right, we're building a step halfway through our paver pad to just kind of even out the whole slope of the thing. This cool guy, Colin, from Western Interlock actually stopped by to help with this process. He works for Western Interlock, which is the company that made the pavers, and he just decided to come help out for free. So that's pretty cool. Shout out to Western Interlock. Now, in order to build our step right off the corner of that house, they had to place these big paver blocks. So Colin very carefully worked his way across from the corner of the house to the edge of the boulders, making sure the first layer of those blocks were nice and level on top of that gravelly surface. He figured out if they were level with a level. Pretty tricky, I know. Now, he wasn't able to use full blocks for the entire thing. He was going to have to cut down one piece, but Evan had this sweet IQ saw, as he calls it. This thing is awesome. Now, I've only ever seen stone cut with a wet saw. This thing is completely dry, but its dust extraction is freaking amazing. It sucks up 96.6% of the dust, as you could see in that video. So, Colin started cutting pieces to make sure the blocks went all the way across from house to boulders and leveled them out. Once he had the entire first row in place, it was time to start working on the second row. Once he got all of the second row fitted and cut to the right size, then it was time to glue the pieces together. That's right, gluing stone together. This is all new to me. I didn't even know this was a thing. I knew you could glue wood together, paper together, cardboard, but stone? That can't be real. But apparently they have this special wet glue that's activated by water. You squeeze it in between the pavers once you get both of them wet, and then you just stick them. And so I'm told the holding power is quite impressive. Pretty soon we had the entire step built, and when I say we, I mean Colin, Craig, and Evan, because I was still getting gravel. After the step was built, Evan started running wire for the lights that we'll eventually put inside the step. He also wrapped some wire around his waist because he forgot a belt. What a silly guy. Another thing that had to be constructed was a stone little border around some wells for some foundation vents, the dryer vent, and some conduit. By the time they had all that done, I showed back up with the gravel. Evan was nice enough to back down the steep driveway for me, and we started loading up more wheelbarrows full of the gravel to place around where we were going to put pavers. This job I was actually pretty good at. I mean, the technical stuff, it's hit or miss. But you hand me a wheelbarrow and a shovel and tell me to do manual labor, I am ready to go. Now, Colin from Weston Interlock told us that we needed to bring the clean 3/4 to quarter stone gravel stuff up to within 3 inches of our step, because we're going to put another type of gravel on top of this, so we didn't want to bring it all the way up. So we started raking it out, making sure it was somewhat level. Colin was compacting it with the wacky packer, and I was cutting more stone for the second well that we still had to build. Pretty soon we had that second well in place, and all of our gravel was pretty much spread out where it needed to be. Then Colin took this big screed and smoothed it all out, kind of eyeballed it, put a string line on it, and then he went around and hand tamped the perimeter while I packed the inside. He didn't trust me to hand tamp the perimeter, so I got the easy job. Once we compacted the entire upper portion, then Colin was nice enough to compact the lower portion, and all of our larger aggregate was spread around and in place. Then I unpackaged the pavers because I just couldn't wait to test out and see if they were good. I gave them a little taste, and yeah, that's the right vintage. Now here's where things get really crazy. I knew that you're supposed to spread out sand or fine aggregate to lay the pavers on, but I never knew how they got that perfectly level. And this is how it's done, using screed rails, which are basically these long metal bars. You place the metal bars on top of our larger aggregate, make sure those are exactly level the way that you want them, and then we took this fine aggregate. Now this is quarter number 8 clean stone. It's not quite sand, it's not quite gravel, it's somewhere in between. And this is what we're going to use as our softer layer to set the pavers on top of. We filled up a bunch of wheelbarrows, I dumped it over those screed rails, and then as you can see, Evan was using that screed stretched across, setting on top of those rails and pulling it across the surface to make sure that all of that fine aggregate was perfectly level. And with that, we were actually ready to start throwing down some pavers. So I loaded up a heaping handful and I carried them over to Evan. I got yelled at a couple times for stepping on that fine aggregate because apparently you don't want to do that after you screed it, but Evan did it, so I figured if he was stepping on it, I could. I mean, the guy's taller and bigger than I am. Why is he got to yell at me? Evan started out by laying pavers in the corner made up from the concrete pad and the house, and then working out from there. He used a big square to make sure that his lines were indeed square because he said you can never trust the house to be square. I tossed him pavers, he put him in place, gave him a little tap tap taparoo with the dead blow mallet, and that was pretty much it. Now these pavers, because they're permeable, have these little tabs on the side. Now not only do these tabs allow you to interlock the pavers in the correct pattern, they also create a natural gap between the pavers that will allow water to pass through the pavers and drain into our gravel field. With that, I just went to town, laying paver after paver, until pretty much the entire lower section was paved, with the exception of a few gaps that we're going to have to make cuts on. The next morning we showed up and started working on the upper pad. Now believe it or not, we did this the exact same way that we did the lower pad. Once we had all of that larger aggregate spread out and compacted, we brought in the fine aggregate, and using those screed rails, we made sure everything was spread out perfectly level. And again, when I say we, I mean mostly Evan did all that work because he knows what he's doing, and I did the grunt labor of filling up wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow with that fine quarter number 8 clean stone. Eventually, Evan did let me take over the screed for like 2 minutes until he said I was doing it all wrong, and then he took back over. But at least the camera shows me doing a little bit of the work, which is the most important. Pretty soon we had all of that fine aggregate spread out on the upper pad, and we were ready to start laying pavers up there. Now for this, Evan started again in the far corner and worked out towards our stockpile of pavers. We put a string line on the pavers as we worked across to make sure that our lines were nice and straight. Evan would lay, I would bring him pavers, he'd lay those, I'd bring him more pavers, and pretty soon we got into a nice little routine. I quickly learned that the paver laying doesn't take that long. It's all the prep work that takes a long time. This time lapse was actually just an hour of footage condensed down into a few seconds. So you can see how quickly we managed to lay a large number of pavers. Another thing to note is that we had multiple pallets of pavers, and some of those pavers were made on different days. So we made sure to grab pavers from different pallets every time we brought new ones over, so they would all be evenly intermixed throughout the patio, and we didn't have any stark color variations. Speaking of color variations, did you notice the house was painted a new color? Looks pretty good. Once we had all of the pavers, for the most part, laid, and I'm talking about full pavers, we had to start cutting them to fit in the various little parts around the perimeter. So it was back over to this IQ saw, which, I mean, look at that. There's no dust coming off of that thing whatsoever. I would cut down the pavers to size, carry them over, and just very carefully fit them into their little places. I know this takes a long time, but this was the most fun for me because it was super satisfying to take the measurements, cut a paver, and then try and work it into each little gap. It was a little difficult because of those tabs that are on the outside of the pavers. You really had to wiggle them into place, but we got it all done eventually, and it was really starting to come together. When it came to all the pavers that butted up against the boulders, I fully expected and was prepared to scribe each individual paver and try and make it perfectly fit up against the boulders. Evan, however, said that he had another plan. He told me to just cut the pavers as close as I could, but it didn't have to be perfect, and that he had a trick to make it look nice and clean when we were all finished. I gotta say, I really enjoy scribing. It's probably the woodworker in me, so I was a little disappointed, but I trust the guy. So I got close, but not too close, just kind of roughly cut all those pavers to size and put them in place. I also had to cut all the pieces around the front of our step. So very carefully, I had to scribe those to get the correct angle, cut them to fit, and tap them in place with that dead blow hammer. Once I had the lower sections done, Evan had marked out all the cuts for the upper section because we're going to be putting these custom stair treads up there. So I cut along his marked line over in the IQ saw, and then I plopped all those pieces back in place. Now before we can put the treads on, Evan got out a grinder and he started just eating away at those blocks. I was like, whoa, Evan, what are you doing? You're destroying it. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, he knows what he's doing. I don't. He was actually grinding out recesses for our understep lighting. Once he had that all sorted out, he started placing these treads that were the exact same color as the pavers, but they're made for stairs. And yes, believe it or not, we just glued those in place too, because we're out here gluing rocks together now. It's a real thing. When we got to a section that needed a light, he'd place the light on first in that recess that he carved out with the grinder. He'd very carefully run the cord back so that we could access it, and then he'd glue the step in place. And he just worked his way along like that, like a kid in a craft store making some papier-mâché. Once our steps were installed, it was time for Evan's trick with those pavers along the boulders. And by trick, he literally got out a battery-powered Makita demo saw and just free-handed a perfectly curved cut all the way along the boulders about 3 to 4 inches out. It was actually really impressive. He started by just using the saw to score a line, get his general shape, and then he said we'll go back and cut all the way through the pavers, and then we'll fill in that space between the pavers and the boulders with some nice natural rocks. That's pretty smart. And it did save us probably 2 days of meticulously cutting and scribing each individual paver. Like I said, we went back and cut along his scored line with a bigger saw. If you're wondering why I'm holding the hose and we didn't just hook it up to the saws, well, his attachments for the saws just happened to not be working right. So I got to be the hose guy. Once we had all of our pavers cut, we had to cut a little bit of this chunky concrete off the front of the driveway slab so that we could lay the pavers right up to that. Once Evan cut through that, I pulled off all the, gnarly pieces to give ourselves a nice clean edge. Ooh, And then we finished laying the last few pavers that we had to get in there to butt right up to that concrete slab. Now notice how we had the perfect fit between the slab and the pavers. We didn't have to cut some little slivers. I'd like to say that that was planned, but that was complete happy accident. I mean, we started at the house and just moved towards the driveway, and it just happened to work out perfect. I was pretty darn impressed. I thought Evan would take the credit, but he also said it was just a happy coincidence. We kept cutting that curve all the way through the pavers. After he was done, I'd go along, break off any little pieces that needed to be broken with the mallet, and remove all the excess chunks. And before long, we had all of our pavers completely cut and installed, and things were looking nice and clean. I also realized that I was way too careful cutting the pavers against the boulders. I didn't realize how far out he was going to come with that saw, so I wouldn't have been as meticulous had I known what the plan was. Sometimes you should tell people the plan. But so far, it looked something like that. Now, I had this question from the beginning. How do you make sure the pavers stay where the pavers are put? And then Evan was like, well, we're going to put in some concrete for edge retention. We sprinkled some fiberglass fibers into the concrete, essentially making GFRC concrete, and then we added some water. Our hose froze up over the night, so we had to get water out of the pond to mix the concrete. But water is water. And we only got like 2 goldfish in there, so that was pretty good. We just kept adding concrete, glass fibers, and water until we had a nice working consistency that looked something like this. Then taking that concrete and very carefully shoveling it around the outside perimeter of our pavers, we made a nice little concrete border that, when dry, will lock those pavers in place and keep them from moving around. Now, Evan again said it didn't have to be pretty because we were going to cover it all up, but I just couldn't help myself getting out a trowel and making it nice and smooth. He did say it's a good idea to slope this concrete away from the pavers so that it directs water away from our paver field. I mean, to be honest, with permeable pavers, I'm not sure why that matters, but what Evan says, I do, because he's a lot bigger than me. Once all of our concrete was around the border for the edge retention, it was time to fill in all the cracks between our pavers with more of that number 8 quarter clean stone aggregate stuff. This is the most satisfying part of the entire job, probably, because you just dump some random piles of gravel all over the place and then you just work it down into all the little cracks and crevices. It's got a very ASMR feel to it as you just brush over the top and watch each individual crack get filled up with that rock. This really locks those pavers in place. It makes them nice and sturdy and solid, and it really elevates the whole look, making it look very fresh and very clean. Evan said when you're brushing the sand or rock into the pavers, you should always work downhill. So we brushed the upper pad, and then when we had some leftover, we brushed all the leftover onto the lower pad. Evan came behind me with the hose and really cleaned off any extra aggregate that was left behind. And then once we had all the cracks filled with the rock, Evan got out this roller compactor. I'm not sure what the difference is between this and the plate compactor. Maybe it's a little more gentle. And then he went and compacted all of the pavers. He had me use a leaf blower to make sure there weren't any rocks in front of the roller compactor that we were smashing into the pavers. But I'm kind of starting to think he was just giving me something to do, because I look kind of silly just standing there with a blower and a beer. But We got the whole thing compacted. After it was compacted, then we added more gravel to fill in any cracks that had leveled out from the compaction. This will be the final step to making sure the pavers are locked in place. Once that was done, we got some nice clean river rocks to fill in that border between the pavers and the boulders. I mean, they're not clean now, they're all covered in dirt, but Evan got out the hose and started spraying them, and then they were nice and clean. And I gotta say, this overall look with that smooth line transitioning to the boulders with the river rock in between, I like it. It's almost like Evan knew what he was doing from the very beginning. Once I had all the river rock in place, I gave it a good bath, washing away all the dirt, and the whole area was looking good. I mean, I know there is still a ton of work left to do on the inside of the house. But with this paver project, the exterior of the house is pretty much finished, which feels fantastic to finally mark something big off my to-do list. Not only does it look good, it is a huge improvement to what was here before. It's not just a walkway, it's a usable space now. The upper pad is big enough that we could put a nice bistro table and some chairs, sit out, lounge, relax next to the nice pond, maybe try and catch some goldfish and fry them up for dinner. A huge thanks to Evan over at Pride Hardscape. If you're not already, you should definitely go over to Instagram and follow Pride Hardscape. You will not be disappointed.
There's nothing to roll over yet in this shop. Hope you enjoyed that video. I think it's fair to say that's a pretty big change. I mean, one was stone and one was wood, and apart from that, one looks way better than the other one. If you haven't done so already, you should go check out all the links in the video description, because there's a link down there to our Patreon page where you could get a ton of behind the scenes footage. I mean, everybody over there already saw this thing before it was even done, because we share all the highlights as the week progresses. There's also a link to our bourbon blade, which is in stock right now, which means if you get on the website and order one, you only have to wait. It'll ship that same week. So you should click that link, check it out. There's also links to products, and you should go follow my friend Evan's Instagram page, Pride Hardscape on Instagram. Check it out. Big thanks to him. Now, we gotta build a table or something, because I need something to flip over the top of. Oh, hi. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Now, I know we talk about Squarespace a lot. That's because they're flipping awesome. I use Squarespace. I used them to design my website. It was easy. I just picked out a template. I put all my stuff in there. I customized it to make it fit my needs. And if you're a woodworker, content creator, you own your own small business, Squarespace is a great website, because did you know there's Squarespace payments? They make it super easy to onboard all your payment methods right in one place. You can take Apple Pay, ACH, direct debit, all sorts of things right on Squarespace. And if you're somebody that has to send invoices for jobs or work that you've done, you can send invoices directly through Squarespace. I didn't even realize that, but you can. And they made it super simple to do that, to send invoices and collect payments. So that's pretty sweet. Also, did you know that there's unlimited products on Squarespace? So if you want to add 1 million products, you can. 6 million products? Sure. 10 million products? I don't know if it's ever been done, but I think you could. That's what unlimited means. Squarespace is doing some pretty amazing things. They've just introduced their design intelligence. What's design intelligence, you might ask? Well, they take 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise, they mix it with a little cutting-edge AI technology, and they unlock your strongest creative potential. Design intelligence basically empowers anyone to build a beautiful website, more personalized websites tailored to their unique needs, and craft a bespoke digital identity to use across one's entire online presence. I mean, if that's not cool, I don't know what is. So if you're not convinced by now, you probably haven't been paying attention. What you're gonna wanna do is go to squarespace.com/bourbonmothwoodworking and receive 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain when you use the coupon code BOURBONMOTHWOODWORKIng. I'm telling you, you're not gonna be disappointed. Super easy. I mean, I did it, so if I can do it, then, well, I'm not really computer smart, so then you could also do it.